my life in the hands of two of my coworkers, wondering if I would ever see my friends and family again. It was the most terrifying day of my life, and it made a lasting impact on me. As you can see, we made it out okay. But as a result, I have a story to tell, and I'm grateful to have the chance to stand up here today and share it with you. So I'll start by rewinding a little bit. In a previous chapter of my life, this was me. For about 14 years, I dedicated my life to the sport of mogul skiing and was lucky enough to spend the last few years of my career on the Canadian ski team. As much as I loved the sport, it eventually became clear that it was time for me to move on. By the end, I was really starting to feel like a skiing robot. My whole identity was wrapped up in my ability to ski a mogul course. Every opportunity I was given, the way I was treated, it felt like it was based off of my ranking in the country. I felt like a number on a page, and I was just ready to feel like a human again. Now, I had been pursuing filmmaking on the side during my ski career, so I always knew that film was waiting for me when the mogul skiing was over. So when the time was right, I hung up the competition bib, moved out here to North Vancouver, started film school here at Capilano, and my life became filmmaking. While exploring different aspects of film in school, it became clear that my calling was to make documentaries in the world of sport, but with an emphasis on the human side of sport. So I joined forces with a few friends that had a similar outlook, and off we went on a new career path. We've had the privilege of working with some amazing people in our films. Our films have dived into subjects and themes of mental health, addiction, eating disorder, work-life balance, emotional control, disability, and more. The subjects in these films have repeatedly opened my eyes to vulnerability and the power of vulnerability and the impact of sharing stories, both on themselves and on others. You know, during my time as an athlete, I was pretty prone to bottling my emotions. I thought to be strong was to keep everything inside and put on a brave face. You know, I was reluctant to ever speak to a sports psych. I would just paint a smile on my face and pretend like everything was okay, even if I was struggling. It took me getting involved in these mental health sport films to teach me that vulnerability is okay and might actually be cool. When these people in these films open up and share their perspectives and their experiences with us and with our audiences, it makes a huge impact on me, and I'm really grateful for those people and how it's helped me in my own self-growth. So when I found myself struggling to recover from a traumatic accident, I knew this was my chance to try and pay it forward and share my story. So for a few years, I worked on an outdoor sport travel show. We would travel around the world, link up with different locals, and have them share their stories. And in February of 2022, we were in Saas-Fee, Switzerland, and we were asked to film a guided snowshoe tour up on the glacier. We showed up to the tour company's office not really knowing what we were getting into, and we asked them questions about safety and the difficulty of the hike and how much gear we should be bringing, and they said, oh, it's a really easy hike. We bring tourists on it every day, not to worry. Next thing I know, we're being handed harnesses, headed up the gondola, and we're walking up the ski resort. We were then led off the resort, where we were hooked up to a rope, our guide up front, myself behind him, and my coworkers Thomas and Mark behind me. We then embarked on a couple hours of hiking and filming in some absolutely breathtaking terrain on a perfect bluebird sunny day. It truly felt like one of those days that I could barely believe I was at work. As we were finishing up our shoot, the guide turned back to us and said, okay, we're just about done here. We're gonna turn right here and head back down to the gondola. As he started to walk, his foot sunk into the snow. And he looked back at us with this kind of goofy smile on his face, and he said, see guys, this is why we keep our distance on the rope, which was a safety precaution he had mentioned earlier. But then his whole leg went in, and the smile vanished from his face. He looked back at me right in my eyes and screamed. He said, go over there and pull. So I hustled over to where he pointed, grabbed the rope, and started pulling as hard as I possibly could. But after only a couple seconds, his entire body broke through the snow. I was yanked off my feet and sent flying headfirst into a crevasse. What I saw next felt like it was straight out of a movie. You know, black and blue ice and ice pellets and snow just flying by my face at full speed while I fell what I thought was going to be to my death. But then we stopped. Mark and Thomas had enough slack on the rope between myself and them, and quick enough reaction time to see me go flying, grab the rope, fall to their sides, brace for impact, and catch us. They literally saved all of our lives. Down in the crevasse, I scrambled, trying to find something to hold on to. I remember yelling, I'm scared, and just trying to find something to hold, but It was just sheer walls of ice around me and I couldn't find anything. And then we fell a little bit further and thankfully stopped. Fortunately, down a little bit deeper in the crevasse where the guide was, he was able to get a foot onto something, which took a little bit of the load off Thomas and Mark, but where I was, all I could do was hang. I estimate I was maybe 7 or 8 meters down and our guide would be double that. You know, into the distance, all I could see was blackness, and beneath me the same, just blackness. And I did everything I could not to look down. Ironically, just a couple days before all of this, we had filmed a segment of the show with Air Zermatt, which is the rescue service in the area. So I knew how they operated, and I knew that if we could get a hold of them and if we could hang on long enough, they would be here in a helicopter and could come save us. But the way I was hanging in the rope, I couldn't get to my phone. So I called down to the guide and said, "Can you call rescue?" And he got on the phone and he was speaking Swiss German. And when he got off, I said, "Okay, is rescue coming?" And he said, "Oh, that was another guide." I said, "Okay, can you call rescue now?" And he got on the phone again, once again speaking Swiss German. And when he got off, he told me that was his wife. And now I'm really starting to worry. I'm thinking, this guy knows something I don't. You know, he's not calling rescue because he knows we're screwed. And that was a goodbye call to his wife. And the panic is really setting in at this point. But after a little bit of time, I noticed myself start to feel a little bit more calm. I remember actually putting my hand on my heart and feeling that it was beating at a normal rate. And it kind of freaked me out. I remember thinking, like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not panicking? This is bizarre. In retrospect, what was happening is my body was shifting into a heavy, heavy fight or flight mode. It was then that I started to notice the rope above me was moving up and down a little bit. So I called up to Thomas and Mark and asked if they were okay. And Thomas yelled down with what were probably the most important words of the day. He said, "We've got you locked in." And, you know, deep down I knew they were just hanging on with all their might, but his choice of words there, "locked in," helped me honestly believe that they could hang on. And then I noticed that the rope above me was draped over this flake of ice on the side of the crevasse. And I saw that if I moved too much, that rope was gonna come dislodged and I was gonna go for a swing. And I was terrified of what that swing might do to Thomas and Mark. So I took my left foot, dug my snowshoe awkwardly into the left wall, dug my shoulder into the right wall, and pressed. You know, my legs had gone completely numb at this point from hanging, so I don't know how hard I was pushing, but I was pressing for our lives. I had asked Thomas and Mark if they could call rescue, and what I later learned is Mark had to take one of his hands off the rope, wrap it around his other arm so that he could free up his hand to call rescue, and after some time, they called down and said, "Rescue's on the way." But now came the waiting game. I closed my eyes, I tried to meditate, anything to make time go by and keep myself from spiraling. But every time I closed my eyes, I could just see faces. I was getting visualizations of my girlfriend, of my family, of my friends. I was seeing all the people in my life that I was scared I might never see again. And I was just terrified of that reality. But I got snapped out of it because I heard camera clicks below me. Our guide was taking photos. I wasn't too pleased about it at the time, but I will admit it is pretty interesting to have something to look back on for this experience. So, time just continued to pass, and it was really hard to keep track of time. It just felt like I was down there forever. I was hearing helicopters and planes, and I kept thinking, that's them, they're here, and over again, it wasn't. You know, as I said, it was hard to keep track of time down there, but I knew how fast they moved, and I was sure they'd be there sooner. And I started to lose hope. But eventually, they did arrive. They set up this tripod-like rig on top of the crevasse with a pulley system on it, lowered someone down who hooked me up to the pulley, and they got me out of there. As I emerged from the crevasse into the sunlight, I looked over at Thomas and Mark, and I gave them a little wave, and Thomas could barely lift his hand to wave back. He had blown his back out when he caught us, and he hung on in agony the entire time. Seeing Thomas like that scared me. You know, what I learned is that Mark even offered to let Thomas have a break and that he would take the rope by himself and handle the weight for a while, and Thomas refused to let go. It's needless to say, I'm endlessly grateful for these guys. But seeing Thomas in pain like that made me realize that they maybe weren't so locked in like they said. You know, we were in more danger than I knew. But before I could get too emotional, I was handed the rope and I needed to help feed the pulley system so that they could go down and get the guide. And when the guide came out, he was pretty bloody on the side of his head. And I think in retrospect, he had suffered a concussion, which could explain some of the challenges I had with him down there in terms of communication. I told the rescue team that I wasn't hurt, but once the feeling came back in my legs and I tried to stand up, I realized I couldn't put any weight on my left foot. So they instructed Thomas and I to walk over to the helicopter and we would get lifted to a hospital. But as we waited for the helicopter, I turned to Thomas and I told him, I know this is a kind of a messed up time to tell you this, but today's my birthday. I know, kind of ridiculous. All of this happened on my 29th birthday. I spent a lot of time in that crevasse wondering if I would live to see 30. So we got to the hospital, we got checked out, and thankfully neither of our injuries turned out to be too serious. Thomas's back injury was muscular and would heal fairly soon. And I had sprained a number of ligaments in my foot, but this was an injury I was more than happy to accept at this point. I was so incredibly excited to get home. I had this whole plan mapped out in my head. I was gonna spend all this quality time with my girlfriend. I was gonna see a different friend every night, just soak in experiences with all the people in my life that I thought I might never see again. I thought life would be sunshine and rainbows after coming so close to losing it. But upon returning home, I learned that this was far from my reality. Once I was home and the dust had settled, I could barely leave my couch. I was having panic attacks left and right. I was scared, I was depressed, I was anxious. I didn't know how to live my life. You know, our accident happened on a tourist trail with a guide of over 40 years experience. And I mean, he was the one that fell in the crevasse. So this idea in life of, oh, well, what are the chances of that happening when you're looking at stuff that's maybe just a little dangerous, now felt like, well, it happened once and it can happen again. You know, bad things happen. And I didn't know how to move forward from there. Basically anything beyond sitting on my couch and watching lighthearted TV felt incredibly daunting. Any tiny thing that would happen to me could send me into a full-on panic attack. I later learned that the reason rescue took as long as they did that day was because there was another crevasse accident nearby at the same time. They were tending to that accident first, and one person didn't make it. And that really put things into perspective. You know, we were very, very lucky to be alive. Now, for the few years leading into all of this, I was kind of becoming this mental health advocate through our film projects. So I knew I needed to practice what I've been preaching, or else I'd kind of be a bit of a hypocrite. So I started seeing a counselor. And he helped me start to work through some of this stuff. But there's one analogy that really stuck with me that I'd like to explain. He used a cup, and he tried to explain to me how adrenal levels can work. And he said, most people live with their cup with just a little bit in it. And when something stressful happens, they get a small spike, and then it goes back down. But when you go into fight or flight mode, your cup fills all the way to the top. And this is a good thing, because this is what kept me calm and coherent in the crevasse and played a big role in saving my life. The problem, though, is that it can take years for that cup to go back down. So now I'm living my life with a cup that's teetering on the edge of overflow. Any tiny stressor in my life would cause an overflow. You know, a minor inconvenience felt like my world was ending. Things got a bit dark at times. I had days where I had voices in my head just yelling at me to die, because that would be easier than living life like this. And sometimes I wondered why I worked so hard to stay alive that day if this is what being alive feels like. Ultimately, I was always able to acknowledge that those feelings were a result of trauma, not my real feelings, although, you know, sometimes that was easier than others. It was scary and confusing living like that, you know. I knew I was safe. I was back home again on my couch in my apartment in a city, no danger anywhere. But at times I felt more in danger than ever. It was frustrating and very, very confusing, but counseling and EMDR therapy, amongst other practices, helped me start to move forward. My EMDR therapist actually recently explained to me this theory that some people believe in, that healing from your trauma is being able to talk about it. Now, it's been 2 years and some change since that day, and I'm proud to say I can talk about it without too much trouble. But what I'm still working through is the aftermath. This domino effect of mental health challenges that occurred since returning home are still affecting me greatly to this day, and honestly are just a lot harder to explain. It's really easy to say to someone, I fell in a crevasse, I almost died, it was terrifying. It's a lot harder to say to someone, I was having lunch and my foot got a little tingly, and then I had a panic attack, so I'm out of commission for the day, I can't hang out tonight, I'm sorry. You know, I thought surviving the crevasse meant I had got through this situation, but the reality is it might take years for me to move through this fully, or maybe I just never will. What I'm working towards now is trying to accept that, trying to accept this new version of me. You know, the version of me that is prone to panic attacks, the version of me that has huge emotional swings, the version of me that's terrified of taking risks, the version of me that hasn't stepped foot in the backcountry since my 29th birthday, the version of me that cries all the time over what often seems like nothing. This is me now, and I'm trying to be okay with that, although it's a very different version of me than the competitive skier who took risks all the time. I want to thank you all so much for listening to my story, and I want to thank all the people who shared their stories with me. I feel strongly about the power of sharing stories and the healing power that sharing stories has. And I'm so grateful for all the people who have shared their stories with me. You know, when these people open up and share their perspectives, it changes me. I come away from each and every film project with a new approach to life and a lot of self-growth. And I'm very thankful to be up here today to have a chance to try and continue that chain. You know, if it wasn't for all of these people, I don't know if I would have been able to tackle my trauma the way that I have. I honestly fear that if this all happened a few years earlier, before getting involved in these mental health film projects, the results might have been pretty different. But I'm happy to say I'm getting through this stuff day by day, and I'm excited to continue healing. I encourage you to share stories with the people in your life and open yourselves up to have them share their stories with you. Lastly, I want to give a huge thank you to my girlfriend, to my family, to my friends for helping me get through these past few years. If you want to know more about this story, there's a ton more that I couldn't fit into this presentation. Feel free to find me online, reach out. I'd be more than happy to link up and have a chat. Thank you.